Hello and welcome to this second part of my video lecture, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And in this part, we shall try to analyze the rest of the topics. In the first part, we have gone through Mark Twain, the writer, Huckleberry Finn's significance, summary of the novel, and historical context of Huckleberry Finn. This presentation, or the part 2, contains the characters, the themes, controversy, probable questions for examination, and resources. So let us start. The most important character in this novel is Huckleberry Finn. So let us try to characterize him. Huck comes from the lowest levels of white society. His father is a drunkard and a hooligan who disappears for months on end. Huck himself is dirty and frequently homeless. Although the widow Douglas attempts to reform Huck, he resists her attempts and maintains his independent ways. The community has failed to protect him from his father, and though the widow finally gives Huck some of the schooling and religious training that he had missed, he has not imbibed social values in the same way as a middle class boy like Tom Sawyer has been. Huck's distance from mainstream society makes him skeptical of the world around him and the ideas it passes on to him. Huck's instinct of distrust and his experiences with people as he travels down the river force him to question the things society has taught him. According to the law, Jim is Miss Watson's property, but according to Huck's sense of logic and fairness, it seems right to help Jim. Huck's natural intelligence and his willingness to think through a situation on its own merits lead him to some conclusions that are correct in their context, but that would shock the white society in America at that time. For example, Huck discovers when he and Jim meet a group of slave hunters that telling a lie is sometimes the right course of action. Because Huck is just 13 years old, the world seems new to him. Everything he encounters is an occasion for thought. Because of his background, however, he does more than just apply the rules that he has been taught. He creates his own rules. Yet, Huck is not some kind of independent moral genius. He must still struggle with some of the preconceptions about blacks or niggers that society has ingrained in him. And at the end of the novel, he shows himself all too willing to follow Tom Sawyer's lead. But even these failures are part of what makes Huck appealing and sympathetic. He is only a boy after all, and therefore fallible. Imperfect as he is, Huck represents a thinking, feeling human being rather than a mere cog in the machine of society. The second important character in the novel is that of Jim the slave. Jim, Huck's companion as he travels down the river, is a man of remarkable intelligence and compassion. At first glance, Jim seems to be superstitious to the point of idiocy, but a careful reading of the time that Huck and Jim spend on Jackson's Island reveals that Jim's superstitions conceal a deep knowledge of the natural world and represent a reverence for nature. Moreover, Jim has been separated from his wife and children. He misses them terribly, and it is only the thought of a permanent separation from them that motivates his criminal act of running away from Miss Watson. On the river, Jim becomes a surrogate father as well as a friend to Huck, taking care of him without being intrusive or restricting. He cooks for the boy and shelters him from some of the worst horrors that they encounter. In this position of a slave, he is seldom able to act boldly or speak his mind. Nonetheless, despite these restrictions and constant fear, Jim consistently acts as a noble human being and a loyal friend. In fact, Jim could be described as the only real adult in the novel and the only one who provides a positive, respectable example for Huck to follow. Now we come to the themes that are there in this novel. And the first theme is the river and its relationship with Huckleberry Finn. For Twain, it was the water itself that was the key. In Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, the river is both the setting of the novel and its central theme. Like so many children's books, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is deeply concerned with morality. Its metaphors and characters interact so organically that it's often easy to forget that the river really exists. It is always changing, yet always right there, and always in tension with itself. But Twain's river, and because he was a former trained riverboat pilot, it really was his river, is something more American than his enduring ancient symbol. Life on the river is free and easy and comfortable. It is an oasis in every way. Early on, Tom Sawyer accuses Huck of having no imagination, but it is Huck's role as skeptic and arbitrator that illuminates the book and the people around him. Always being grappled with by people on both sides, he stays in the middle. He defines his own morality, makes his own course, like the river Mississippi, and continues on. The second theme is the coming of age. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is unquestionably an adventure representing a coming of age. This is known as a Bildungsroman, a story about growing up. While much of the text supports this description, however, author Mark Twain met with much criticism regarding the way he ended his story. Many critics argue that given the final few chapters, Huck does not appear to have learned anything at all, and in fact seems to regress back to the impressionable young boy he was before he began his journey. While this impression is not without its evidence, but there is ample proof of the contrary as well. Huck develops his already fierce sense of individuality, determines his own moral compass, separate from that of society, and outgrows playing pretend. Regardless of Tom Sawyer's reappearance, Huck shows at the end of the novel that he has gained maturity. Other themes in the novel are racism and slavery, which is a very important theme, and we have talked about it earlier also. That Twain's depiction of slavery as an allegorical representation of the condition of blacks in the United States even after the abolition of slavery is beautifully depicted in this novel. Intellectual and moral education is another theme, and Huck is especially shown to be free from society's rules, able to make his own decisions without restriction. Through deep introspection, he comes to his own conclusions, unaffected by the accepted and often hypocritical rules and values of Southern culture. Huck's moral development is sharply contrasted to the character of Tom Sawyer. Another theme we find is guilt or shame. Huck experiences guilt and shame at various points throughout the novel, and these feelings force him into serious questions about morality. Huck remains conflicted until near the end of the book. The breaking point comes in chapter 31 when he finds himself unable to pray. Huck realizes that in his heart he doesn't believe Jim should be returned to slavery, and saying so in a prayer would result in him playing double and hence lying to God. When he finally resolves to help Jim escape for the last time, Huck banishes the last vestiges of guilt. So, there is a very important factor about this novel, and it is the controversy surrounding this novel. When Twain published Huckleberry Finn first in 1884 in Canada and the UK, and then in the US in 1885, the book was immediately banned, but not for its casual racism and use of the N word, that is the nigger or the negro. It was banned because it was vulgar, thanks to its depiction of low class criminals and things like Huck actually scratching himself. 50 years later, Huckleberry Finn was part of American literary tradition. Both T.S. Eliot and Hemingway thought it was one of the most important books ever written in the US. But it was still being banned, expurgated, and rewritten to suit a somewhat less racist time. Huckleberry Finn raises some important issues. Is it right to own other people? It is about slavery. Is it right to obey laws if the laws are wrong? This one is a little trickier to answer. And are individuals more important than society? This is more confusing question. So when we come to thinking about Tom, Huck, and Mark Twain, we find that Twain was more than a humorist. Behind his mask of humor lay a serious view of life. Tragedy had entered his own life in the poverty and early death of his father, the loss of a daughter, and his bankruptcy. His short story, The Man That Corrupted Hedleyburg, published in 1900, which showed greed at work in a small town, is an indication of Twain's dark side. The controversial Huckleberry Finn, which is periodically banned in schools or libraries because of alleged racial overtones, can be read by children, but it is not a child's book. It has elements of heartbreak and wisdom that can be appreciated best by adults. On the other hand, Tom Sawyer is primarily a juvenile book, but one that can be read with pleasure by adults. Now we have some probable questions for examinations for you, and these questions are: discuss Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as a social and literary satire. Comment on the narrative technique of Twain in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And there is a quotation: here is America in the form of a comic epic in prose. And we have to discuss this quotation with reference to Huckleberry Finn. Another question is: do you agree that Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is racist? Give your reasons. Some more questions are there about the symbolism or themes used by Mark Twain. And the last question can be, which is a very important question, that Huckleberry Finn is both the victim and perpetrator of cruelty. So you have to comment on this question based on the novel. So I hope that you have learned something more about this novel from this second part of my lecture, and you are now inspired to learn more about this character and the writer, and you shall explore it from the resources which have been enumerated in this slide. If you search on the internet, you shall find many, many more. So I hope that today you have learned something more about this novel. Thank you.